Hello guys, welcome back to our anime moments. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of upcoming episode of Soul Land 2 Part 157 based on novel. So let's start. 1 hour went by before the Ice Bear King had his fill. More than a third of the dried meat inside the granary had disappeared. Huayuhao only made his move at this moment, and he used his extra-large storage soul tool to store the rest of the dried meat. He could feed those bears for 2 or 3 meals with that. Feeding bears was truly a difficult task. They had their fill, and Huayuhao sent all 3 bears into his spectral demiplane to rest. This time, he didn't even erect any borders. With the Ice Bear King around, his aura itself would ward off most of the undead creatures. Little Bai changed back into his original body once they entered the spectral demiplane. Big Mao and Second Mao immediately grew silent when they were still wondering why Little Bai could eat so much. They were all bears, and while the dark golden Terraclaw bear's bloodline was considered superior to that of the Ice Bears, the Ice Bear King was so much older than they were. He was as powerful as a savage beast. Therefore, the 2 little bears naturally became little brothers to the big bear. The Ice Bear King loved these 2 little bears. He had countless little brothers back in the extreme north, and now that he finally had little brothers to boss around after he left, how could he not be happy? Huayuhao didn't care about how the 3 bears were messing around inside his spectral demiplane as he snuck out of the granary and went towards the city center. Huayuhao had to find evil soul masters if he wanted to get any information about the Holy Ghost Church. He realized when he was scouting earlier that many soul masters inhabited Heavendo City's royal palace, which had originally belonged to the Heavenly Soul Empire. There were quite a few with formidable soul power undulations amongst them. Huayuhao paused as he came near the royal palace, and he turned around as he turned into a relatively darker street by the side. He turned a few more corners, and then vanished into a shadowy corner. Huayuhao didn't attempt to enter the royal palace directly. There were many powerful individuals here, and the palace's defenses were undoubtedly the tightest. He would likely run into some spiritual barriers if he went in too hastily. If he was discovered, he couldn't be sure if there were powerful soul masters who were adept with spiritual power. Huayuhao concentrated his spiritual power, and he channeled his ultimate ice soul power to readjust his body's temperature. His body temperature quickly became one with the air around him, and he squinted a little as he used spiritual detection on the royal palace once more. This time, he was entirely concealed with imitation. Huayuhao had many formidable offensive soul skills, using his ultimate ice or his spiritual power. However, he only had one true divine skill in his arsenal, and that was imitation. Imitation allowed him to conceal himself, and he could even change the way he looked. In addition to the support from his powerful spiritual power, he could devise entirely unpredictable and mutable battle tactics. Huayuhao's imitation and Shu Sanqi's Xuanwu displacement could both be said to be divine skills that were complementary to their martial souls. Huayuhao's other soul skills were important, but they were relatively less important than imitation, because his other soul skills could be substituted with other soul skills. Huayuhao's spiritual power entered the royal palace once more, and he quickly locked onto a small lake near him. This lake was undoubtedly man-made, and its water was so clear that the bottom could be seen. It wasn't very deep, barely more than a meter, and there were many exotic flowers and plants growing around the lakeside. This was like a garden inside the palace. This dark and shady corner where Huayuhao chose to hide himself evidently wasn't a casual choice. He came to this place because he was eyeing this lake beforehand. There were soldiers patrolling the royal palace, but the chances that they would patrol this secluded corner were a lot lower. After all, there were many soul tools monitoring this area, and the patrols were comparatively targeted at blind spots and the most important places. This is the place. Huayuhao activated his Eye of Destiny, and strengthened his spiritual detection once more. He adjusted his senses to their most sensitive states as he observed everything that was happening around the lakeside. Only when he confirmed that there was nothing wrong around the lakeside did he jump over the wall and enter the royal palace. The royal palace's walls were almost completely covered by oscillation detectors and thermal detectors. The opportunity that Huayuhao chose to enter was right after an oscillation detector swept over. These oscillation detectors rotated horizontally, and Hui Yuhao could never discover their rhythm without spiritual detection. He was making perfect use of this rhythm in this moment. Following that short window of time after he jumped over the wall, he dashed and arrived by the lakeside with a few ups and downs before he discreetly submerged himself in the lake's water. None of the surveillance soul tool would target the water, and that was the reason why he was absolutely safe there. Furthermore, Hui Yuhao could do a lot of things underwater. Hui Yuhao held his breath as he controlled his body to sink to the lake bed. The water wasn't deep, and if it wasn't already dark, he could be very easily discovered within the clear and transparent water, but discovering him under the cover of darkness was far too difficult. Hui Yuhao's eyes gradually shone with pale blue colors after entering the water, and the temperature around him swiftly began to decline. This small lake surface area was about 500 square meters, and it was considered exceptionally scenic. Under Hui Yuhao's control, the lower layer of the lake water began to turn into ice. In normal low temperatures, ice would definitely begin to form from the surface before it would spread downward. That was because ice had lower density, and would thus appear on the surface of the water. However, ice began to spread from the bottom of the lake under Hui Yuhao's forceful control. Furthermore, the ice was secured to the lake bed, and this caused the low temperatures to spread from the bottom up. A thick layer of ice appeared after some time, and the ice stopped forming when it was about 10 centimeters away from the surface. Hui Yuhao's body emerged from the surface, and he discreetly hid himself in a corner that wouldn't be scanned by any surveillance soul tools. From the outside, the lake was still full of water, and the water's surface was still very calm. But anybody jumping into the lake would realize that the water was only 10 centimeters deep, and everything below that was solid ice. Only Hui Yuhao could achieve this level of control. Furthermore, he managed to vary the solid ice's temperature in different areas, and that was something that typical people couldn't accomplish. If the temperature above the ice was too low, then the 10 centimeters right below the water's surface would quickly turn into ice as well. Hui Yuhao's plan would be foiled if a patrolling soldier saw everything. On the other hand, if the ice's temperature was too high, then the ice would be quickly melted by the water around it, and Hui Yuhao wouldn't be able to do what he wanted. Therefore, he had to control the ice's temperature very delicately. Hui Yuhao's understanding towards ice and water had become a lot deeper over the past weeks, and his control over ice and water became a lot easier and more casual. Hui Yuhao wasn't in a hurry to leave. He lay prostrate on the surface of the ice, and he pressed his left hand underwater as he held a milk bottle in his right hand. He absorbed soul power from the milk bottle as he continuously channeled ice explosion into the ice beneath the water. Hui Yuhao could detonate any kind of ice. However, only ice that was infused with ice explosion would possess the greatest explosiveness. He had used this method back then to surprise even the Darkness Holy Dragon, Long Xiao Yao. That was enough to show how formidable ice explosion was. This was also an attack that couldn't be directly used, yet was almost considered a divine skill, which had an importance second only to imitation. Hui Yuhao continued for a full 15 minutes before he stopped. He moved, and continued the same act. The lake surface was a little big for ice explosion, and infusing ice explosion into just one spot wouldn't achieve the desired strength. Another 15 minutes passed before Hui Yuhao stood back up, and he used spiritual detection to open a path as he snuck deep into the royal palace. The various surveillance soul tools on the royal palace's outer layer were greatest in number, and also the most sensitive. After all, prevention was better than a cure, and there were much fewer surveillance soul tools in the palace's inner regions. There were many people inside the royal palace, so surveillance soul tools weren't that practical. These soul tools would only become effective if they were searching for someone under certain special circumstances. If that happened, handheld surveillance soul tools would be sufficient. Hui Yuhao continued secretly into the royal palace. He would stop every once in a while to inspect everything around him closely before continuing. At this point, he was most afraid of the formless spiritual barriers, and even he could only detect spiritual barriers from a close distance away. If his spiritual power touched a spiritual barrier, the person who was controlling the spiritual barrier would directly locate his position if they were strong enough. Fortunately, spiritual barriers weren't common at all. Hui Yuhao was about 1/3 of his way in as he pushed forward, and he still hadn't discovered any spiritual barriers. Hui Yuhao paused, and he stood in a dimly lit region between two pavilions. He briefly replenished his soul power and readjusted his spiritual power so that he was in peak condition before his eyes started to glow. Faint rose gold colors flickered, and his eye of destiny opened on his forehead. All three of his eyes were radiating rose gold hues, and that was especially so inside his eye of destiny, as a black whirlpool could be faintly seen. That was Hui Yuhao's spiritual soul core, that belonged to his spirit eyes. People who were familiar with him would immediately understand after witnessing him in this state that Hui Yuhao was about to use a spiritual-type soul skill with his full strength. Hui Yuhao unleashed spiritual detection to its highest possible level in the next moment, and it spread in all directions with his body at the center. It only took a few blinks of the eye before he encompassed the entire palace. The reason why he had to go deep into the palace was because of this. It would be harder to lock down his position if he was inside the palace, and the reason why he did this was to startle and alert his enemies. At the same time, he wanted to see if the Sun Moon Empire had installed any spiritual barriers inside the Heavenly Soul Empire's imperial palace. If they did, the place in which they did so had to be the most important. Either an important figure or object was bound to be there. He wasn't afraid of being discovered. He was confident in his ability to flee this place quickly. He instantly unleashed his spiritual detection, and a three-dimensional structure of the entire palace appeared in his head. He squinted his eyes and sensed the slight changes around him. He also fully imprinted the three-dimensional structure of the palace in his mind using his immense spiritual power. This would be important for his next visit here. Indeed, just like he had expected, he detected 3 places where spiritual powers interacted. This meant that there were spiritual barriers in those 3 places. Those 3 places were all located near the center of the palace. However, no alarm sounded. The palace was very quiet, as if the spiritual barriers that had been touched didn't have any effect at all. Hui Yuhao wasn't complacent at all. After detecting for 3 seconds, he instantly shut off his spiritual detection. At the same time, he quickly unleashed his spiritual interference domain and used his spiritual avatar to leave behind a streak of his spiritual power to maintain his spiritual interference where he was. He instantly teleported 50 meters away before fleeing in a direction that he had identified earlier. He had found out many things after that brief period of spiritual detection. Indeed, a few seconds after he teleported away, 2 black figures had already silently come to where he was. A huge black web, carrying a slightly fishy smell, fell from the sky and instantly engulfed the streak of spiritual power that Hui Yuhao left behind. His spiritual power immediately dissipated and disappeared. His spiritual interference domain also vanished, and everything turned dark once again. What? A slightly surprised sound resonated. Following this, 2 figures fell to the ground. What's going on? There's no one. An elderly-sounding voice was heard. The other person was also puzzled, and said, "This shouldn't be the case. Earlier, I sensed that the person unleashing his spiritual power was over here. I can't be wrong. This person's spiritual power was strong. He might be a spiritual type titled Dolor. I didn't expect someone as strong as him among the remaining losers in the Heavenly Soul Empire. However, he's very sensitive. After discovering our spiritual barrier, he quickly fled. But it's not so easy for him to flee." The voice of this person talking was very sharp, but their gender was unclear. His frail figure was concealed by a black veil. The person beside him was a tall and large elder. His sinister gaze was still flashing amidst the darkness. He had long, grayish hair that flowed behind his back, while his burly figure was also concealed by his black clothing. There was an image of a ball of white flame on their chests. "Come, let's follow his spiritual aura to find him. He can't escape." The frail man in black snorted coldly, and a deep purple halo was released from his body. This halo was like an oscillation as it spread outward. During this process, slight oscillations appeared in the direction that Hui Yuhao had escaped from earlier. "Oh, this fellow seems to be able to teleport. I only discovered traces of him 50 meters away. It's a pity that it's me. HMPH. Let's go and chase him." As he spoke, the frail man in black immediately leaped up and charged into the sky like a bolt of lightning. He pursued Hui Yuhao in the direction that he had escaped in. The other elder followed closely behind him with his toes touching the ground. He let out intense white light from his body. At the same time, 9 soul rings rose from beneath his feet. The colors of these 9 soul rings were very weird. 2 of them were yellow, 2 of them were purple, and 5 were black. It was an ordinary combination of colors, but each soul ring had a blurry layer of color on it. This caused the original, bright colors of the soul rings to become much dimmer. This was especially so for the 5 black soul rings. If not for the fact that they could be compared to the pitch-black clothing he was in, the difference in their colors might actually be overlooked. Without a doubt, this elder was a titled dolor, whereas the frail man in black was actually surrounded by a layer of distorted light. Traces of yellow, purple, and black could be seen, but it was unclear how many soul rings he possessed. The 2 figures quickly chased in a specific direction. Very soon, they came to the small lakeside that Hui Yuhao had used to hide. While the Heavenly Soul Empire's imperial palace was very expansive, that was mainly because of the structures in the palace. For powerful soul masters like Hui Yuhao, they quickly came to the boundaries of the palace as they unleashed their full strength. Hui Yuhao was above the lake. If he moved forward any further, he would be within the range of the surveillance soul tools surrounding the palace. His spiritual detection was still in use. Due to his all-around detection earlier, he clearly knew where all the spiritual barriers were. Right now, he just needed to move his spiritual detection around those 3 spiritual barriers, and the entire palace would basically be under his detection. He naturally discovered the 2 people that were chasing him. The 2 of them were very quick. That elder was a titled dolor. As for the other man, Hui Yuhao was unable to clearly tell. However, the other guy had to at least be an advanced tier soul dolor if he wasn't a titled dolor, judging from his spiritual undulations. Evil soul master? A cold grin surfaced at the corner of Hui Yuhao's lips. Following this, he charged straight towards a wall of the palace. At this moment, he seemed not to care about being discovered by the surveillance soul tools. Ring ring ring. Deafening alarms sounded in the next moment. The entire palace was alarmed. Beams of light subtly appeared in the sky. Evidently, the aerial surveillance soul tools were scanning in this direction. Not only this, beams of soul rays started to surface from above the palace walls. They were all sweeping towards his direction. The Sun Moon Empire did well in erecting a defense as strong as this, even though they had only occupied the Heavenly Soul Empire for a short period of time. A cold and mysterious look appeared on Hui Yuhao's face. He twisted his body in the air before his soul thruster lit up. Instantly, he charged towards the streets outside the palace. He unleashed his imitation, and immediately disappeared. Even if there were oscillation detectors, they still needed time to adjust and come over. By the time they arrived, Hui Yuhao would be long gone. It was impossible to follow him directly, given that his imitation was in use. 2 figures were also chasing him at great speed. Just as they flew above the lake, tremendous boom sounded. Boom! The entire lake seemed to have been mined with countless bombs. A terrifying explosion ensued, and almost the entire Heaven-Do city could hear them. Amidst the resonating booms, the lake became the most frightening explosive. Countless ice flakes flew everywhere, and the immense explosive force blew apart the layer of ice that had formed on the surface of the lake. This explosion was too sudden. There weren't any clues before it happened. When it occurred, the frail man in black and the elder were both astonished. They were both pure soul masters, thus they didn't have any automatic defensive soul tools on them. When the explosion occurred, they could only subconsciously circulate their soul power to resist it. Both their bodies were instantly flung high up into the air. The frightening explosive force continued to surge upwards as the lake instantly expanded to 5 times its original size. The huge structures around it were immediately taken down by this explosion. Even the wide and thick palace walls collapsed. The strength of this explosion was equivalent to an all-out attack from an ice-type titled dolor. Although Hui Yuhao was a soul sage, he had been accumulating power there for almost an hour. He had drained a lot of his soul power before he completed his ice explosion technique. In addition, he had frozen the lake water into ice beforehand. The entire process took a lot of effort. He wanted to achieve a result just like this. The surrounding distorted lights around the frail Soul Master disappeared following the explosion, revealing his 8 soul rings. He was already coughing up blood in the air. When Hui Yuhao had escaped earlier, he sneakily stuck close to the lake surface as he flew. For this frail Soul Master to follow his spiritual trail, he naturally had to follow Hui Yuhao's escape route closely. This was why both of them were almost at the center of the explosion, and were sent high up into the air by Hui Yuhao's ice explosion technique. The elder was faring much better, given that he was a titled Doluo. Although he was caught unawares, he still relied on his abilities to neutralize most of the impact. The other Soul Master wasn't so fortunate. He was only a Soul Doluo, and he was a spiritual-type Soul Master. He wasn't adept at defense. As a result, he was immediately hurt critically by the explosion. His legs were blown off, and his soul power also became very messy in his body. The excruciating pain caused his aura to turn into a huge mess. He was already screaming tragically in the air. Blood was flowing from his pores. Fortunately, his cultivation was rather strong, which saved his life. If he were only a soul sage, he would have lost his life to Hui Yuhao's accumulated ice explosion technique. That titled Doluo's face was also covered in ash from the explosion. Although his limbs weren't blown off, the shirt he was wearing was in tatters now. He spat out blood in the air, and his blood quickly turned into ice before falling to the ground. Both he and that frail Soul Master were evil Soul Masters. When evil Soul Masters were influenced by their own evil strength, they would become very self-centered. Naturally, the titled Doluo couldn't bother with the other Soul Master right now. As he tried to stabilize himself in the air, he quickly unleashed a defensive soul skill and hid within a layer of thick grayish fog. At the same time, he quickly retreated. The other Soul Master couldn't adapt at all. As he was critically hurt, he had already fallen from the air by. He was flailing as he tried to circulate his soul power to control his body. However, he couldn't do it in the end. At this moment, he suddenly a chill down his body. This chill didn't come from the temperature of the outside world, it originated from his own senses. As a spiritual-type Soul Doluo who was an evil Soul Master, his senses had always been very acute. When this feeling came, he realized that something was amiss. He desperately screamed, "Save me!" The elder who was rapidly retreating heard his call the moment he exited the radius of the remaining shockwaves of the explosion. After hearing his calls, he was furious. It was because of him that they were caught in the ambush. Aren't you just falling from the sky? Don't tell me you'll fall to death even though you're a Soul Doluo. Why are you screaming so loud? Even if you're hurt badly, your injuries aren't lethal. The elder had no intention of saving him at all. However, it was also at this moment that he was shocked to find out that the dark sky seemed to have slightly distorted in the space a little ways away from the man in black. Following this, a beam of golden light flashed before it penetrated the head of the frail man in black. The frail man's body was quickly shriveling up as he fell from the sky, and that golden light also revealed its true appearance. It was a long spear that was sharp on both sides. The spear exuded blinding, petrifying golden light. Disastrous. The titled Doluo seemed to have realized something. His figure quickly flashed before he charged straight towards the sky. However, that beam of golden light vanished in the next instant. Following this, there seemed to be a distorted figure that flashed past. In the next moment, everything returned to normal once again. Scoundrel! The titled Doluo shouted furiously, and a huge patch of thick greyish fog pursued that distorted figure. Wherever it passed, blasting sounds resonated through the air. However, his attacks were evidently futile. He could only hit the air. When that frail man in black was killed, he realized that the enemy's target was that frail man in black. The reason was very simple. He was adept at spiritual abilities. From the start until the end, they had not seen the appearance of the enemy. However, without a doubt, this enemy was a spiritual-type Soul Master. Of course, in the eyes of the titled Doluo, the enemy was a spiritual-type titled Doluo. To this enemy, this elder wasn't the true threat. This was because he could conceal himself. Even given the Elder's cultivation, and even if he unleashed all his senses, he could only discover his enemy within a certain region. On the other hand, that Soul Dolor was different. With him around, it was like having a pair of eyes. It was much easier dealing with the spiritual type titled Dolor. Obviously, the spiritual type titled Dolor wanted to kill the Soul Dolor, because that would greatly reduce their control over him. There were very few spiritual type martial souls in the world of soul masters. There weren't many spiritual type soul masters, even in the Holy Ghost Church. There were more spiritual type evil soul masters compared to ordinary soul masters. However, in just a few years, 3 of them had already died. It was important to know that these evil soul masters were very crucial to the Holy Ghost Church, even though they had very weird temperaments. This rank 87 spiritual type Soul Dolor had now died. How could they possibly catch the enemy now? Indeed, the person who had killed the Soul Dolor was Huiyu Hao. After he charged out from the palace, he found the most appropriate time to use his ice explosion technique with the help of his spiritual detection. As for turning back to attack, it was originally not in his plan. He had only thought of that idea suddenly. He didn't intend to deal with the frail man initially. After all, it was his first time seeing him and sensing his threat. The reason why Huiyu Hao took action was because he wanted to act when his ice explosion technique was the most effective. He controlled his ice explosion technique with the help of his spiritual detection. Huiyu Hao didn't charge too far out then. He stopped and turned back, and struck just outside the palace walls. The reason why he had returned was because he saw the titled Dolor Elder abandoning his partner, leaving him exposed in the air. Huiyu Hao wasn't fit to be called an ultimate soldier if he didn't seize the opportunity. Throwing the golden dragon spear from afar was Wang Chio's ultimate skill. Huiyu Hao wasn't as strong as her, but he wasn't weak either after fusing with the soul rings she had turned into. Furthermore, he had strengths that she didn't have too. Why did the golden dragon spear appear after the titled Dolor saw a distortion in the dark sky? This was because Huiyu Hao had used his imitation on the golden dragon spear just as he threw it out. This wasn't just a simple use of his spiritual type soul skill. It involved attention to detail. The process was very complex. First, he had to leave a streak of his spiritual sense and spiritual power on the golden dragon spear. He could only do this after his spiritual power materialized. In addition, he was only able to complete such a rapid fusion of his soul and spiritual powers after he had formed his soul core. After this, he imprinted his imitation onto his streak of spiritual power and used it just as he threw the golden dragon spear out. Simply speaking, his imitation was actually unleashed through his golden dragon spear. This was why it was completely concealed in the darkness. It only revealed itself when it arrived in front of the frail man in black. Even when it appeared, it was fully under Huiyu Hao's control. This was because he still had to ensure that his spiritual power continued to move his golden dragon spear and complete the attack. The golden dragon spear thus absorbed the life energy of the frail man. His life energy was directly kept by Huiyu Hao's spiritual power. On the golden dragon spear, it was like an avatar with its own spiritual power and life energy. This avatar controlled the spear to fly back to him as fast as possible. As it flew back, Huiyu Hao's imitation was unleashed again. This allowed the golden dragon spear to move like the wind and instantly conceal itself. This was why Huiyu Hao's attack actually drained a lot of his effort, even though it was just a simple strike. It was only completed through his immense spiritual control. As for the elder, he had discovered Huiyu Hao too late. How was it going to be easy for him to pursue him now? The immense soul power undulations caused by the ice explosion technique didn't only blow apart all the surveillance soul tools in this region of the palace, but it also caused great interference to the aerial surveillance soul tools in the air. It was only possible to locate Huiyu Hao using another spiritual-type soul master. Huiyu Hao moved through streets and alleys as he hid in the darkness. He only stopped after he was sure that he was in a safe place. Right now, his breathing was a little quick. However, there was an excited look in his eyes. Ultimate soldier. This was a true ultimate soldier. Sneaking into the enemy's base, killing an influential figure and fleeing far away. From the start until the end, he wasn't even exposed. The enemy didn't even know who had made such an attack. This feeling was great. From the earlier all-around surveillance in the Heavenly Soul Empire's Imperial Palace, where Yu Hao had already clearly found out that there was only one spiritual-type soul master in the entire palace. It was that guy. Without any soul tools, that guy wasn't able to pose a threat to him. Although spiritual surveillance soul tools could locate him, they still had to be controlled by soul engineers. Compared to soul masters, they weren't very adaptable. Moreover, they couldn't track him. Unless the enemy could use spiritual surveillance soul tools in conjunction with oscillation and thermal detectors, as well as lock onto his position the moment he was detected, there was no way he could be detected, given current soul tool technology. Yu Hao had always been monitoring the Sun Moon Empire's soul tool technology throughout this period of war. This was why he was so confident. When he landed in Juzi's trap the last time, it was because he had been too careless. He had underestimated the Phoenix Soul Engineer Legion, which caused him to be exposed. But it was a good lesson. At least he wouldn't allow himself to be exposed in the future when it came to similar situations. His direct fighting abilities right now were already very strong. More importantly, he was great at concealing himself. This was actually the most terrifying part about him. This video will end here.